Hi. So this is the staking economics panel. So we have Dankrad is joining us on the panel. Dankrad has worked on like many aspects of the Ethereum protocol. Is mainly known probably from his work on data availability, but recently he's been thinking about staking. He has done some proposals related to staking mechanisms, and he's also driving some research efforts in the area of like staking macro in the protocol. And then Barnabé, you just heard, he has been leading the research efforts at RIG since before the merge, and now he's been thinking mainly about tree staking, but also other aspects. So the way we'll do the panel is, first I will give a high-level overview of this slide, which is essentially, it's a summary of a research program in staking economics that we are trying to put together. It's not done, but like these are the key ideas that like we have in front of us. And then we'll start the panel, like most of the discussion will be related to some of these. So yeah, the first area is around like staking mechanisms. Like the implicit one is solo staking, but then there is other ones that either have been proposed, such as like the two-tier staking model that was initially proposed by Dankrad, but then kind of like some other ideas from Vitalik also in this area. Then the second aspect is decentralized staking out of protocol. So this is where there is a protocol outside of the Ethereum protocol that essentially provides the staking services and usually issues liquid staking token. And the third area that ties into these two is like a restaking mechanism that like we just discussed. Then the other area we're looking into is like the microeconomics of staking. So essentially like how do you construct the staking supply schedule? There is like different classes of users that they have, like, they may have different willingness to stake. So this may be relevant to like look at different classes because like both their cost structure and the welfare implication of like doing policies may be different for them. And then the third one is like the area of like staking macroeconomics. So like the first aspect is like the supply equilibrium of ETH. So essentially questions around like issuance and burn. So and the second one is the staking equilibrium, right? So like given like the monetary mass, like some fraction of it is going to be staked. So what is like the equilibrium deposit ratio? How can we drive towards like sustainable deposit ratio? What does it even mean? And then finally, an important one is like the market structure of like the staked ETH, right? There is like solo, decentralized, and centralized. What are the market shares? Yeah. So maybe to kick off the panel, I would like ask the panelists like which areas in this potential program have been like mostly on your mind, and maybe elaborate a little bit around like where do you think there is more need for like invest research efforts? Yeah, maybe we can start with Dankrad.
Yeah, so what I'm most interested in is I think right now the whole area is in a way it has taken us by surprise. Like a lot of things have happened over the past year, and we're kind of like still trying to fully understand first, like, okay, like there's one thing what is happening right now, but like also like understand it more fundamentally so that in the future we will not always be like behind, but we'll actually be kind of know roughly what could happen, and that we would be more prepared in terms of our understanding. And so like I think my personal goal right now in the whole economics space is like to get much better expertise in terms of macroeconomics and so on, and some of it is modeling, but some of it is also just coming up with the right frameworks of understanding it.
Yep. Yeah, as for myself, like Dankrad, I feel like I'm trying to ramp up what has already been written and discussed in many places, but also make more formal some ideas that have just been floating for some time. So things like the deposit ratio and targeting of stake in the protocol, I think are very potent and currently understudied and quite misunderstood as well. We do have someone in our team, Anders, who's been thinking about this for some time. And so what I would like for myself is to make my way through these ideas and evaluate them, communicate them as well. I was thinking about restaking for a little bit, but mostly from the angle of restaking as commitments, because that made more sense to me as a microeconomist, let's say. But I do think now I want to understand better this risk aspect of restaking, and this was a really preliminary effort into getting that traction. So yeah, getting there and not being behind the curve, I guess, is one of the things that really drives me.
Cool. Yeah. So maybe we can elaborate a little bit. Maybe we can start from like, Barnabé, can you describe like the very basics of like on the deposit ratio targeting side? Like, what does it mean to like have a deposit ratio? Like, what does it mean to target, and like how can like tools from macroeconomics help us?
Yeah. So currently in Ethereum, we have a reward curve that defines the expected reward to a validator if you provide good services to the network. That reward curve is decreasing in the amount of validators in the system. So the more validators come in, the lower the reward is. It has good properties. Like it seems to have stabilized, in fact, in the latest days. So it does reach an equilibrium at some point, which is not 100% of the ETH being staked. It depends on many factors, like the macro environment, like other things that we can't really control or even have legibility over when we design for the protocol. And so the idea of the deposit ratio targeting or range targeting is to say that there is an amount at stake that we're comfortable with in terms of network security. So I'm going to throw a number which is incorrect, but 10% or 15% or even any number between 10 and 15% of the ETH staked would be enough to provide security to the network. And we, instead of having this fixed decreasing reward curve, we're going to sort of dynamically update the rewards such that if we have too many people who want to stake, we lower the rewards. And if we have not enough people that want to stake, we increase the rewards. So think of it, if you know EIP 1559, as this idea of a controller that has a target and tries to bring back the system towards that target economically.
Yeah, maybe just like a short addition, like you mentioned the problem of like essentially like knowing how the supply of stake is going to behave. I think it ties to like the efforts around like understanding the supply schedule, because if you want to do like targeting, it's going to be hard to do if like you don't know, yeah, you set the demand, but you don't know how the supply spins. Cool, so maybe like something related to what Dankrad was saying, that it would be good to like, so essentially we kind of have this strategy of like we pursue the research, but we also try to get like more people engaged, especially from like the macro community. There is one thing that I've been thinking about is like in the traditional macroeconomics community, like there is a lot of research, but it's a bit of a gap from that to like implementable mechanisms, right? Because in the traditional macroeconomics world, then like usually like the monetary policies are set like in the order of like quarters, and like there is no like system that does that. So like, do you feel that there is really a gap, and then maybe like what can we do to actually bridge that? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I'm a little confused about your question. Are you talking, you're saying it's harder in the traditional macroeconomic world, or?
No, I'm not saying it's harder.
Yeah.
I'm saying it might be different. And like, I guess the question is like, is it enough to engage like a macroeconomics expert, or we need to go maybe like one step beyond?
I mean, I think there are similarities and there are differences. Like, I think like the biggest differences are like our systems are like massively simpler than traditional, say, country macroeconomics. They are open, like a country can control its currency and it has actually a chance of like capturing at least most monetary transactions, whereas we don't have that. People can always very easily just use something else if they don't like Ether. And the friction is much, much lower. So traditional macroeconomics can, I think, work much more with friction, as in like, oh, do I really want to buy treasuries instead of keeping money in my bank account? Versus for us, it's like, and typically like individuals don't do that, for example. Individuals just keep their money in bank accounts, right? Whereas for us, like with liquid staking tokens, we found out how trivial it is to build into the protocol ways of just very efficiently, with almost no friction, or just using like mechanisms to get yield, for example, but also keeping the advantage of the base asset, which is the liquidity. So I think that's what makes it different in some ways. But I still think it's very interesting to like engage with everything that exists, but you need like people who are able to like think in this with these additional like new factors in mind.
Yeah, definitely. And also like the data we can see, it's like can inform like some more maybe like automated mechanism that like traditionally cannot be employed.
Cool. And I would say also there is an approach when you do macroeconomics or even econometrics to understanding systems and evaluating the data. So Brett, who couldn't make it unfortunately, has very interesting work actually using methods that are very much borrowed from existing theories and trying to apply them to the system that we have, which is in some ways different, but in other ways kind of similar to other things. And so having this data-driven view and sort of approach to understanding the system, I think is very valuable, even if the system is pretty different.
Yeah, so maybe like I want to maybe survey like the other topics and sections too. Like maybe we can talk a little bit about different staking mechanisms. And maybe I'll try to play devil's advocate here, because I think we have like similar ideas, but in order like to foster a conversation. So maybe the first question is, there is an emergent market of like staking mechanism. Like why do we need to do anything on the protocol, right? Either related to like solo staking or to this new proposal. Maybe we can start with Dankrad since.
Yeah, so I think like, I mean, Barnaby like really illustrated in his talk, right? Like the main problem that we have is this principal agent problem, that like currently the protocol is not aware of like what is actually at stake. And that is like, it's very like, when the protocol was designed, there was a certain assumption. And in a way, it's still true. Like when, say, a double signing happens, like we do burn a massive amount of Ether. We would do that, and they would get slashed. It's just not the actual node operators, the actual people who do the double signing, that are impacted by that. And so I think like this is why I thought it was worth like fundamentally also rethinking like the staking protocol. And I think it's still not clear. Like earlier, for example, I talked about friction, and like I think like ultimately, like in many ways, like if you think of it from a purist view, like for example, then like things like my two-tiered staking proposal doesn't make sense, because trivially you could also liquidate for the first tier and then like you're back in the same situation. But like can like, for example, friction in certain aspects, like just making certain things very easy, just be enough to push like into a much more sustainable equilibrium?
Armed, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I feel like, and this is something that comes up in many other places, including in PBS, this idea of, yeah, what do we enshrine or not enshrine? I do think there's quite a lot of what Dankrad mentioned, which is we want to enshrine things that give you like not necessarily a better alternative in all cases, but just something that is there and that is secure and that just raises the bar for everything else that's built outside of the protocol to kind of meet. So you know that if your out-of-protocol mechanism is not secure enough or doesn't convince of its security enough, people will just fall back to the protocol-approved option. And maybe this is good enough, even though it's not widely used. So I'm thinking of things like EPBS or even inclusion list might not be helpful, but that's a good thing. If they are empty, it means we're not censoring anything. So yeah, just having something in protocol makes it like just harder for anyone outside to develop a bad competing alternative, I guess.
And maybe I'll go back to Dankrad. So you were saying like essentially talking about offering this other option. So do you envision like a future world in which like there is like a variety of options, like some in protocol and some out of protocol that kind of coexist? Yeah, it's like.
I mean, I think on staking that's currently just wide open, and I think like we just don't know yet. I mean, I currently think, so I mean, like again, like for example on delegation, right? Like do we need in protocol delegation? And I think like it's like not necessarily true. Like for what I mentioned about like friction could also be, well, what if we had a very well-established set of smart contracts for delegation that are formally verified and everything, so that you know like this is the best thing you can have. That would also massively reduce the friction of using these smart contracts, because you suddenly get rid like with a new small operator, you get rid of this massive smart contract risk that's like flashing in your head. So there are many different options.
Barnabe?
Yeah, no comment on this.
Okay. Maybe we can maybe dive a little bit and try to talk about like also maybe start explaining like from simple terms like how this like in protocol delegation solution could work. Like I don't know, Dankrad, if you want to like take maybe 2 minutes like explaining like the basics of like how the proposal or like maybe future version of like this in protocol delegation scheme can work.
I mean, I think like there's not much to talk about. That would be a standard, but I don't have a strong opinion on that. No.
Oh, maybe specifically on the two-tiered staking.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's so basically two-tiered staking. The idea is that you have two types of capital, and the idea was this: like right now we have these liquid staking tokens, and in a way, so for example, Rocket Pool already has two tiers of capital. They have the node operator deposit, and they have the liquid part, and it's basically in a way enshrining that. And other operators, so for example, Lido does not have explicit collateral by the operators, but they have implicit collateral, which is the reputation of the Lido protocol and the operators. And so like, basically like, in a way, I think that that's problematic. Like we would maybe like to have some explicit collateral for like all liquid staking protocols, and like two-tiered staking would be like a way of pushing it into that direction by enshrining this part into the protocol, that this would just be the standard, and like at least users would be pretty, taking an extra risk if they don't use a protocol like that.
Okay. And like the design, the simple design would be that essentially like there is node operators that have like some capital at stake that can also be slashed, so like that's like fully at risk, and then there is like a broader set of like users that can essentially like delegate to these node operators. So in a way they are voting with their ETH, but they are not subjected to like risk essentially.
Right, so the second tier, the only function it actually has is it's a voting mechanism, and the idea is essentially the Ethereum community should decide what is the right way to vote, and you would say like, well, ideally vote for good node operators that aren't censoring or things like that.
Interesting. Barnabe, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I mean, what the effort with the balance sheet tried to do is make clear this distinction between the different tiers of assets. I think the two-tiered staking sounds like the most reasonable when you look at this distinction between L.NoETH and NoETH. I'm hoping that maybe we can generate more ideas. I think there may be some out there, and then evaluate more proposals. This is me pointing fingers at nothing right now, but yeah, I do think there's a pretty wide space of mechanisms that we're just starting to scratch the surface of. So yeah, I'm excited to see more.
Yeah, so essentially you're saying that this effort of like understanding and formalizing a little bit all the risks can kind of inform like future iteration on maybe the two tier staking.
And even reviewing what many people are doing in this room. I know there's node operators, protocol designers. So there are many ideas that I think are ahead of where the protocol is at that would be nice to just evaluate more systematically and understand.
Cool, thanks. So maybe for the last 5 minutes, I'll open it up for 1 or 2 questions from the audience.
Hi. So leverage usually goes well until the point where it doesn't. And so we see this in the traditional financial system where over-levered banks, if there's some default that can trigger a wide-run banking crisis. So if we see all this restaking going on, how do we prevent this in Ethereum from happening?
Sorry, prevent what exactly?
Like a bank run situation where the node operators' capital gets exhausted, and then we see that there is more slashing, people running to the door, trying to get out of their staked positions.
So you cannot really have a bank run situation because like all of these systems are using on-chain mechanism to reallocate capital. So there's not really a way, unless some protocols are misdesigned, like some protocols might have this problem. But theoretically, like each liquid staking token, for example, gives you just a fraction, give you a fraction of all the staked capital. So there's no bank run. You like everyone can try to get out, and they get like their fraction of like what remains after the slashing. What you can have is, of course, like catastrophic slashing events, and like this is the risk you're taking when you're delegating to an operator at the moment.
If I'm worried that a node operator is defunct and gets slashed today and will get slashed 2 blocks from now, everybody will try to get in to the next block to get the funds withdrawn because they anticipate.
You cannot unstake in 2 blocks.
Yeah, or whatever, sooner rather than later.
Maybe also something that Dankra was pointing out is that like there is a proportional claim on like the amount of asset that remains. So yeah, so that's what maybe prevents the bank run.
Hello, thank you for the panel. Just one question. I know it will be unwavy, but there are a lot of things there that obviously are interesting, and I totally understand the point of view of the foundation. Like we want to understand more deeply all this. So my question is, how formal do you want to be with that? Because usually, like for me, understanding means building a mathematical model that reliably like lets you understand what's going on. But usually for that amount of structure is something that takes a lot of time to develop. And so in the end, you get a plausible description of what's going on when what was going on is already outdated, basically. So like, my question is, in practice, heuristically, how do you roll out like this research program? How much is like proving theorems and how much is like Babylonian mathematics and, you know, like having an understanding heuristically of what is going on? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good question. The answer might be we want to be a little less formal than how you usually are, which is pretty formal, Fab. No, but I do think there's value in having many different angles of attacks. Some Babylonian math, which is just drawing the hieroglyphs on the wall and trying to match them together, which is what I'm doing. We can also have proofs and theorems when we think about more microeconomic problems like principal agent problems. There's some toy models, which are more like stylized models, where you can get a lot of intuition from that. Something that we've been doing quite a lot in our team is simulations. I think they're also helpful to think about different paths that the risk might expand or contract. So yeah, I do think this is like a pretty tall order. Like there's a lot of things on that slide, and each problem is pretty deep by itself. So yeah, I would personally advocate for a variety of solutions, finding the right level of abstraction that also lends itself to becoming something that's implementable at the end, because yeah, we can write papers, but it's not super useful to the protocol at the end of the day. So yeah, that's definitely finding the sweet spot is most of the work, in my opinion.
Great. Yeah, I agree. Maybe we can take the last question.
Yeah, thanks for all of you for a really interesting panel discussion. So this is a very vague question. Just when you think about restaking, is there like a percentage of stakers, if they restake, that we would feel uncomfortable? Like, you know, if we look just percentage-wise, yeah, where would that threshold be where we feel that that now becomes a security risk for the ecosystem?
Yeah, I can try and answer. I don't know if there's a number. I think restaking just has risk inherently. It doesn't necessarily need to make us feel uncomfortable if the risk is managed and if we have good confidence in the infrastructure that's built around that. Yeah, if we see 95% of stakers restaking into a commitment that will obviously blow up at some point, we would be worried. But if they all restake into, I don't know, making commitments about block content, maybe that's also worrying. Okay, there's a lot of worrying scenarios, but some of them are not, and I think these are the ones who are more economically useful at the end of the day. So yeah, I think it's hard to just give a single number. Yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to wrap it up here. We'll have a 5-minute break so that you can context switch a bit, and then we'll go to the mechanism design for automated market maker session. But thank you very much for the panel.
Thank you.